Hello, my name is Isaac and welcome to the Green Left Show. Now, the federal election just resulted in a massive win for Anthony Albanese and Labor and a big rejection of Peter Dutton's coalition, including Peter Dutton himself losing his seat. So today on the Green Left Show, we're going to be talking to Peter Boyle, who's a long-term socialist activist and Green Left journalist, who also stood as a candidate for Socialist Alliance in the New South Wales Senate. Peter's going to be talking to us about what led to this result and what it means for people who are campaigning for a better world. If you like our work, please become a Green Left supporter. We don't accept any corporate donations or advertising, so we're 100% people-powered. That means we need your support to continue, and you can sign up from as little as $5 a month at greenleft.org.au/support. This interview was conducted on the stolen land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And Green Left pledges to stand with First Nations people campaigning for justice, sovereignty, land rights and treaty. Thanks for joining me, Peter. So Labor have been returned to government after a disastrous result for Peter Dutton's coalition. What's behind this result?
The decisive defeat of Peter Dutton and the coalition in the election is something that obviously something to be celebrated, because I think it's basically set back the prospects of a government in Australia, even partially following in the footsteps of the far-right Donald Trump administration in the United States. Some of that agenda, of Trump's agenda, was definitely hinted at numerous times by Peter Dutton and many members of his shadow cabinet in the form of reference to, draining the swamp in Canberra, cutting the public sector down, the campaign, supposedly against woke culture, the obvious play to racist scapegoating of immigrants and foreigners, and that atrocious display of approval, effectively, for the orchestrated and highly offensive booing of the Welcome to Country at the Anzac Day dawn service in Melbourne. All this was certainly painted Peter Dutton and the coalition as having the desire to follow along the line of the Trump administration. So a big defeat for the coalition was a defeat for that direction in politics. However, it has to be said that this was the victory by the Labor Party was more built upon the basis of the failure or the collapse of the support for the coalition. This was an election very much fought between the major parties on a very narrow range of issues. Both sides, had initially sought to win this election on the basis of, if you call it, the small target strategy. While both sides were trying to said their focus was on the cost of living crisis, neither side was prepared to put forward any significant solutions to the cost of living crisis, whether serious measures to address the housing crisis, which is probably the biggest part of it, to deal with rising energy prices or rising grocery prices. Neither side really put forward anything. So, in a sense, this election was set up to be a small target, a competition between two major parties pursuing a small target strategy. However, it was the appeal to Trumpite politics by Peter Dutton and some of his shadow ministers that effectively broke the coalition out of this mold in the minds of many voters. And therefore you see the point at which the fortunes of the coalition start to turn in the polls, match the huge public reaction in Australia and around the world to Donald Trump's Liberation Day declaration of basically a trade war on the rest of the world, but particularly on China. I think that just, shocked a lot of people. So people from across the political spectrum have felt increasingly uneasy about, the consequences of particularly the trade policy. Because, it introduces a level of economic uncertainty that, in a sense, potentially hurts people from all classes. So that being said, if the actual impact of Trump, if you like, on the Australian election was a real thing, and I believe it was a real thing, it has to be recognised that this was only so in a reactive, in a limited, shallow sort of way. The political cartoonist Kathy Wilcox did a cartoon in the middle of this election campaign, on the theme of the elephant in the room. Yeah, the elephant in the room being, in this case, an entire herd of elephants. Because if you were to follow the political debate through this election campaign, as the mainstream media covered it, and as the two major parties sought to frame it, so many big issues were completely left out of the discussion. Okay, forget about real solutions to the cost of living crisis. There was absolutely no mention of the climate crisis, which hasn't disappeared. Clearly, it's getting worse, and very dramatically so. There was no mention of the war, the genocide in Gaza, and the drums of war that are beating all around the world, and the war drive that Australia is participating in together with the United States. There was no discussion of the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine deal, which not only threatens to blow out the budget, but also locks Australia into a more deeper integration into the United States war machine. No mention of any of this, the tremendous social problems that are facing this country, from the position of First Nations people, where the so-called official campaign to close the gap, is showing that it's going totally in the opposite direction on many indicators, most significantly in terms of imprisonment rates, incarceration, etc. So this herd of elephants is not going to go away, because these are real contradictions in society, and they are going to shape the challenges that are going to confront the new Labor government in its second term of office.
Now, the Greens have also lost at least 2 of their 4 seats, and the third one, the seat of leader Adam Bandt in Melbourne, is also on a knife's edge, and he could potentially lose it as well. What are your thoughts on this?
The Greens are definitely going to be suffering a reduction, a significant reduction of the representation in the House of Representatives, in the lower house. But that's not because there's been this big swing against the Greens. In fact, the Green vote has more or less stayed steady at about 12%. The reason why their representation is reduced is a combination of voters swinging towards the Labor Party, mostly from the Liberal Party, and also, there has been a campaign by right-wing organisations like Advance Australia and so-called Better Australia, the group which is connected to the Zionists, to put the Greens last. So that there was new preference pressure on Greens candidates, and this, where the margins were fairly tight, this could make a huge difference. So the Greens have basically, remained the same.
Socialists received a higher vote across the country, particularly in Victoria, where Socialist Alliance long-term Marybeth councillor Sue Bolton received a vote of 8.2% in Wills. And Victorian Socialist candidates also did well in Cooper, Fraser and Scullin, getting a result between 6 and 9%. And there was also an improvement in the Senate results across the country. Does this mean there's an increased appetite for socialist politics in this country?
The shift to the smaller parties has continued, and while the far-right parties such as One Nation and Clive Palmer's Trumpet of Patriots and other small right-wing parties have had marginal increase in their vote across the country, so has the left. And Socialist Alliance and Victorian Socialists have had quite significant increases, particularly in Victoria, in their vote. And I think this represents a continuation of the crisis of politics as usual of the two-party system. And, it is something that could develop further in future elections. And, obviously it's a struggle for the socialist movement to assert itself and step forward and take a bigger slice of that vote. Of course, this is not going to be done purely on the electoral sphere. It's not going to be achieved purely by electoral campaigning. The fight effectively starts now when the election is over, because what will be decisive in terms of the future success of socialists and other progressives in the electoral sphere will be what they do outside the parliamentary sphere, in the actual movements in the streets in the period between elections. That's always been the case. You've got to develop real links with community, develop real standing and respect through our leadership, our ability to provide leadership in struggles for progressive change, that in the end will lay the basis for electoral gain in future elections.
What demands should movements be making on this second-term Anthony Albanese Labor government? How can progressive change be won?
It's very important for the social movements to keep pressure on the Labor government, while the prospect of a more Trump-like right-wing government in Australia may have been defeated in this latest election. We have to remember, this is the pattern not only in Australia but all around the world, that the political basis for it and the economic basis of it has been laid by governments of a nominally social democratic or centrist character. They, by implementing the neoliberal measures that have actually made life worse for the majority of people, made life worse for workers, made life worse for retirees, for pensioners, for the unemployed, for single parents, all these things that have actually lowered the actual living standards of the majority and sharply reduced the prospects for generations to come, for future generations, certainly in terms of access to housing, but also in terms of having to shoulder massive debts, student debts through the HECS system. All these problems, they actually lay the basis for a future right-wing populist party or leader to come in and manipulate it, use scapegoating, racism, etc., all the usual tricks that we're seeing being carried out by Donald Trump and other right-wing populist leaders in Europe. The political ground for this is prepared by precisely governments like the Labor government that have been implementing neoliberal policies for decades and decades. So if we really wanted to prevent the prospects of a Trump-like far-right government coming in the future, we have to, the social movements have to put tremendous pressure. The social movements have to put relentless pressure on the incoming Labor government not to carry out more neoliberal policies that hurt the ordinary people. In fact, we have to put pressure on them to make major reversals. And, cutting edge of this, I guess, could be things like the push for public housing. Not just more public housing, but good public housing, not just public housing that is accessible to the most marginalized sections of the community, but public housing that's accessible to ordinary working people at a scale that can start to liberate housing from a market which is like totally operating, totally in the interests of the landlords and the owners of capital, who see housing as simply another investment.
And any final comments?
Socialist Alliance has this basic message. We welcome the defeat of the coalition government and the defeat for Trump-like far-right policies that this election result has delivered, but we can't afford to just celebrate and relax, because if we don't put up a fight, if we're not active in this period in between elections, out in the streets to fight for the rights of ordinary people, to fight for social justice, to fight for ecological sustainability, well, the prospect of a future far-right government, is going to be there, hiding in the wings. So our message is, join us, get active, help build the movements that can deliver the future that we need.
Thanks, Peter, for your insights, and I hope everyone watching enjoyed this episode of The Green Left Show. As I said at the beginning, you can become a supporter from as little as $5 a month by heading to greenleft.org.au/support. And you can also check out our analysis of the election results and our continued extensive coverage of social movements and protests across the country and also around the world by heading to our website. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Green Left Show.